The laughter started with a map. It was a simple tactical display, projected in the center of the Vorin conclave chamber, showing the known military assets of every major species in the galaxy. The Sorathi had their silver cruisers. The Thelis had their interceptor wings. The Durath Collective had their swarm carriers. The Keshari had fast patrol destroyers that could outrun almost anything in open space. And the Vorin, the ones who had called this meeting, had their sleek, angular warships that won every simulated engagement in every war college across 4-star systems. Then someone added the human ships to the map. They were big. That was the first thing. Not just big, massive, blocky, wide-hulled and slow-looking even as icons on a display. They had none of the swept angles of Sorathi design or the narrow profiles of Keshari destroyers. They looked, as Captain Relin of the Sorathi put it, like someone had welded a city to an engine and told it to fight. That was when the laughter started. Captain Drosk of the Vorin was first. He made a comment about construction philosophy, something polite, in the language of military theory, but the smile behind it was plain. Captain Heave of the Durath Collective pulled up the human ship's listed top speed and read it aloud. The room reacted the way rooms react when a number is absurd. Captain Orvin of the Thelis Empire asked, with genuine academic curiosity, why a species would continue building a class of vessel that had been tactically obsolete for 2 generations of warfare. Captain Siren of the Keshari simply looked at the display for a long moment and said, "Do they not know?" Only Relin said nothing at first. He was watching the human delegation in the side gallery. There were 3 of them, a diplomat, an analyst, and a man in a plain gray uniform with no decorations. The diplomat was taking notes. The analyst was watching the display. The man in gray, Commander Aldrich, according to the session register, was watching the 5 captains. Not the display, the captains. Relin noted this and said nothing about it. The conversation moved on. The 5 captains were here to divide navigation rights across 3 newly charted corridors. Humanity had been invited as observers because 2 of the corridors touched the edge of human-patrolled space. The gesture was diplomatic. It was not meant to imply that human opinion would carry weight. Drosk moved the discussion forward with the clean authority of someone who had run these meetings before. He outlined the proposed divisions. The Sorathi would take the Durath corridor. The Thelis and Keshari would split the Vener passage. The Vorin and Durath would jointly administer the Reach. Humanity got nothing, because humanity had not been asked to contribute and had not asked to receive. Orvin returned to the subject of the battleships because she was the kind of officer who followed curiosity wherever it went. She had pulled up a detailed schematic while Drosk was talking. She shared it now, the profile of a human ISV-class dreadnought, full technical breakdown, hull thickness, armor rating, weapon loadout. She highlighted the armor rating twice. "This is excessive," she said, not cruelly, simply as a statement of engineering fact. No modern weapon system requires this level of passive protection. Active shielding, speed, countermeasures, these are how you survive in modern combat. This much armor just means the ship is slow and expensive. Heave agreed. A Durath swarm carrier would dismantle it in 4 engagements. The carrier doesn't need to fight the ship directly, it simply outlasts it. Siren added, "Our fastest destroyer could run circles around one of these for 6 hours, and the human crew would never get a clean firing solution." It was around this point that Aldrich stood up. The room noticed because he had been so still. He crossed to the refreshment table at the side of the gallery, poured himself water, and came back. That was all. He hadn't said a word, but something about the movement, the absence of reaction in it, the way he carried the stillness with him, made Relin watch him a second time. Drosk wrapped up the session with plans to reconvene in the morning for formal ratification. The 5 captains filed out for private dinners and staff briefings. Aldrich stayed behind. He sat with his water and pulled out a small handheld terminal. A message had arrived during the session, flagged priority, military routing, triple encrypted. He read it in about 10 seconds. His expression did not change in any way that an observer could name. He typed a reply of 4 words. He put the terminal away. The analyst from the human delegation came over and asked if everything was fine. Aldrich said yes. The analyst asked if he wanted to respond to any of the captain's comments, formally, for the record, since the session had been broadcast. Aldrich thought about it for a moment. "No," he said, "let them keep talking." He finished his water and left. Behind him, the tactical display was still running, the map of the galaxy still glowing softly, the blocky human icon still sitting there among the elegant shapes of every other species fleet, slow-looking, graceless, and apparently not worth worrying about. The display had no way to show what was already moving through FTL toward the Durath corridor. It would have changed the mood of the evening considerably. The recording spread the way embarrassing things always do, fast, and further than anyone intended. By the time the conclave reconvened for its second session, the tactical room footage had been clipped, translated into 11 languages, and distributed across 3 major news networks serving Sorathi, Thelis, and Keshari populations. The clip that traveled furthest was 40 seconds long. It showed Captain Orvin reading the human ship's armor rating aloud, then pausing, then saying, "This is excessive," then the room laughing. Nobody had meant for it to go wide. A junior communications officer in the Thelis delegation had shared it with a colleague. From there, it moved the way all things move when they are funny and the audience is large. On the Vorin homeworld, a popular commentary program ran a 10-minute segment comparing human battleship design philosophy to ancient pre-space construction methods, mostly kind, mostly amused, fundamentally dismissive. On Keshari networks, an animated video showed a sleek destroyer flying rings around a human dreadnought while the dreadnought slowly, painfully, turned to aim. It had 17 million views before the conclave's second morning session began. The 5 captains were aware of all of this. None of them had asked for it. None of them stopped it. Inside the human embassy relay station, the broadcasts were being watched, translated, and filed. A young signals officer named Davin had been awake most of the night compiling summaries. He was not angry. He had been in this job long enough to know that anger was a reaction to things that surprised you, and nothing about this surprised him. He filed his report. He flagged it routine. He went and got coffee. Fleet Admiral Cressida read the report at her desk on Earth with the kind of expression worn by someone who had already known what was in an envelope before they opened it. She forwarded it up the chain with a single attached note. "Let them keep talking." Then she pulled up a different file, a logistics report, movement orders, ETA calculations. She studied these for a while. Then she signed several documents and filed them. The second day of negotiations at the conclave was formal and productive. Navigation rights were agreed upon. The Sorathi formally claimed the Durath corridor. All parties signed the preliminary framework. Aldrich signed as observer, which carried no binding authority, and everyone knew it. It was during the late afternoon recess that the first alert came in. 3 civilian mining vessels and their escort had been ambushed in the Durath corridor, the same corridor that had just been formally assigned to Sorathi authority 6 hours ago. The attackers were Sorathi themselves, a splinter faction warlord-aligned, who rejected Captain Rellen's authority and had been operating in the outer belt for months. They had hit the convoy, destroyed 2 escort ships, and driven the civilian vessels deep into the asteroid belt where they were now pinned. The 3rd escort ship was still fighting but badly damaged. The attackers were Keshari-contracted miners, Siren's people. The room went from formal to tense in about 4 seconds. Rellen was on his feet immediately. He was a good officer and he was furious, not at the attack itself, but at the timing of it, the deliberateness of it, the message it sent about his control of his own people. He issued orders to his fleet's fastest elements before the session chair had even called for silence. The problem was distance. The Durath corridor was 11 hours from the conclave at standard fleet speeds. Rellan's fastest units could make it in 7. Siren's patrol destroyers, which were genuinely fast, could potentially reach the outer belt in 6 hours. Drosk offered Vorin interdiction support, but his ships were positioned even further out. Orvin's interceptors were fast but lightly armed, wrong for a sustained engagement against dug-in targets in debris-heavy terrain. The math was not good. In the asteroid belt, the surviving escort ship had maybe 2 hours before it was gone. The civilian vessels were sheltered in a dense cluster of rocks that the attackers hadn't fully penetrated yet, but they had no engines capable of running and nowhere to run to. They were waiting for rescue that was 6 to 7 hours away at minimum. The 5 captains were running calculations, overlapping them, trying to find a combination of fast ships and firepower that could reach the corridor in time. Aldrich was reading his terminal. Davin's overnight signals report had included a footnote: routine logistics, movement orders, the kind of background noise that filled 20% of every day's traffic. 3 ISV-class vessels conducting scheduled patrol sweeps of the outer transit corridors. Aldrich had read the footnote 12 hours ago. He had not mentioned it. There had been no reason to mention it. He stood up from the observer's gallery. Everyone was busy, captains issuing orders, aides running calculations, the session chair trying to manage the chaos. Nobody was looking at the man in the plain gray uniform. He stepped into the corridor outside the chamber and made one call. It lasted 40 seconds. He came back in, sat down, and resumed watching. Rellan caught his eye across the room. Aldrich said nothing. Rellan looked at him for a moment longer than was necessary, then went back to his calculations. The room was full of noise and urgency, and the particular desperation of capable people who had the will to fix something but not the position to do it. The call Aldrich had made was already done. The math was about to change. The rogue Sorathi commander's name was Vesk, and he had been fighting in asteroid belts for 11 years. He knew the terrain better than most fleet officers knew their own ships. He knew how debris clouds ate sensor resolution. He knew how rock formations could channel weapons fire. He knew how to position fortified ships so that any attacker had to come at him from a narrow angle while his own guns covered a wide one. The Durath belt was deep and dense and cold, and it was his. So when 3 large contacts appeared on the edge of his sensor range, 2 hours after the ambush, not 6, not 7, 2, his first reaction was professional assessment, not alarm. He pulled up the silhouettes, ISV-class, human, 3 of them. He relaxed slightly. Human battleships. He had read the same analyses everyone had read. He knew their speed ratings. He knew they were built for deep space engagements in open lanes, not for threading through an asteroid belt. The rocks alone would limit their approach vectors. His fixed guns would have clean shots while they were still maneuvering. This was, if anything, a better situation than fighting Sorathi vessels whose commanders knew his tricks. He hailed them on an open channel, deliberately open, so the listening conclave could hear. Human vessels. This is a Sorathi territorial dispute. You are in a closed combat zone. Withdraw to a safe distance or be fired upon. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice came back, flat and unhurried. This is ISV Cradle. You have 30 seconds to release the civilian convoy. We will not ask twice. Vesk laughed. His crew heard it and some of them smiled. He replied, "Your ships cannot navigate this belt effectively. We both know this. Withdraw and no humans need to be involved in." The 30 seconds ended. The ISV Cradle did not maneuver for a favorable approach angle. It did not try to navigate around the denser rock clusters. It pointed itself at Vesk's position and moved forward in a straight line, and the 2 ships flanking it, ISV Ardent on the left, ISV Relentless Shore on the right, did exactly the same. They were slow. Everything anyone had said about their speed was true. They moved like mountains move, without haste, without elegance, without any particular care for what was in the way. Vesk opened fire. 12 plasma cannons, 4 missile batteries, everything his 3 forward ships had. It was a serious opening salvo. Against a Sorathi cruiser, it would have been a catastrophic hit. Against a Keshari destroyer, it would have been a kill. The Cradle's point defense grid came alive first. Missiles died in clusters before they reached their target, not dodged, not outmaneuvered, just deleted, picked off by a system that had nothing to do but watch for incoming fire and kill it. The plasma hits landed. Armor plating absorbed them. Not shields. The human ships weren't relying on shields for this. The hull itself was simply built to take the hit and keep moving. The Cradle kept moving. Vesk switched to the next phase, concentrated fire on the lead ship, try to kill a weapon system, slow it, find a weakness. His gunners were good. They focused fire on the Cradle's forward portside cannons and landed 3 solid hits in a row. The portside cannon battery went quiet. Vesk pressed the advantage. The Cradle's starboard battery fired once. A single kinetic slug, rail-accelerated, the size of a small vehicle, crossed the distance between the 2 ships in 0.3 seconds and hit the lead rogue cruiser amidships. The cruiser did not explode dramatically. It folded. The middle section simply ceased to exist as a coherent structure, and the forward and aft halves separated and began to drift. The ardent and relentless shore were still moving forward. Vesk gave rapid orders. His ships repositioned, pulling back into the rock clusters, using the terrain the way he had always used it. He had 7 ships left. The human battleships were big targets and slow, and the belt was dense. He could make this work. He had made harder situations work. The Ardent moved into the rock cluster without slowing down. It hit 3 significant asteroid fragments on the way in. Hull cameras aboard Vesk's nearest ship captured it clearly, rock masses that would have destroyed a cruiser simply grinding against the Ardent's plating and spinning away. The ship was accumulating damage, scoring along the port bow. A secondary weapon cluster going dark. It kept coming anyway. The relentless shore took a different angle and began methodically destroying the rock formations that Vesk's ships were sheltering behind. Not hunting the ships directly, removing the cover. One formation at a time. Patient. Systematic. Vesk had 11 years of experience in asteroid belts. He had never fought anything that treated the belt the way he treated it. Not as terrain to navigate, but as a problem to be solved one piece at a time, with no concern for the cost of solving it. His second ship was gone. His third was pulling back deeper into the belt. The civilian convoy was no longer fully surrounded. He opened a channel to his remaining commanders, then closed it without speaking. There was nothing useful to say. The Cradle was still moving toward him, 1 cannon short, hull scarred, entirely unconcerned. Vesk issued the order to release the convoy. The sensor feeds were live on every ship racing toward the Durath corridor, and nobody was looking away. Drosk had been in combat. He had commanded fleet engagements across 6 campaigns and had studied hundreds more. He knew what a ship-to-ship fight looked like on a sensor display, the movement of contacts, the energy signatures, the gaps where ships used to be. He could read a battle from its data the way some people read a story. What he was watching now did not read like any story he recognized. The human ships were not using the tactics that the data suggested they should be using. They were not trying to flank. They were not attempting to draw the rogue formation into a pursuit. They were moving in a straight line toward a heavily fortified position in terrain that should have made straight lines suicidal, and the sensor data showed damage accumulating on the forward vessel, real damage, ongoing, and the vessel kept moving anyway. He pulled up the Cradle's last known specs. He looked at the armor rating that Orvin had highlighted 2 days ago and called excessive. He did not call it excessive now. Heave of the Durath Collective had his tactical analyst beside him, both of them running the same numbers independently. Heave's people fought in swarms, distributed, fast, sacrificial. Individual ships in a Durath formation were not meant to survive sustained direct fire. They were meant to be too numerous and too mobile to hit cleanly. The concept of a single vessel deliberately absorbing that level of punishment and continuing to function was not, in the Durath framework, a viable military strategy. It was happening anyway. His analyst said quietly, "Their damage tolerance calculations must be entirely different from ours." Heave said, "How many of those ships does humanity have?" His analyst pulled the figure. He read it once. He read it again. Heave looked at it for a long moment. "In service or including reserve?" "In service." The number was not the largest fleet in known space. It was not even close to the largest, but it was all one class, all heavy, all armored, all built the same way. No light elements, no skirmishers, no scouts, just that. Heave said nothing for the rest of the transit. Orvin was doing what she always did when something surprised her. She went back to the records. She had the full archive of human military engagements in the past 2 centuries, and she was reading them now with different eyes. She had read them before for strategic overview. She had noted the casualty ratios, flagged them as high compared to Thelis engagements, and filed them as evidence of inefficient tactics. She reread the same engagements now and saw something different. The human casualty numbers were high because they kept fighting in situations that other species would have withdrawn from. Every engagement where human ships had taken significant damage, those ships had not retreated. They had continued to fight. The battles had been long and costly, and at the end of them, the human fleet was still there, and the opposing fleet was not. She had labeled this inefficiency. She now considered another word for it: persistence. She cross-referenced it with a list of engagements that humans had lost. The list was short, not because they had never been outmatched. They had been outmatched frequently, against faster or more numerous enemies. They lost engagements when they were outnumbered 6 to 1 or more, or when the tactical situation was genuinely impossible. They did not lose engagements because they were outgunned at the start and expected to stay that way. She closed the archive. She sat with that for a while. On Rellen's ship, nobody was doing analysis. Rellen was watching the feeds with his senior officers, and the room was very quiet. The rogue fleet was his failure of command, ships that had operated under his flag before rejecting his authority, taking action that now put him in the position of watching alien ships handle a problem he should have solved. There was nothing complicated about how that felt. What was complicated was the feed from the Ardent's hull camera, which showed the ship moving through debris that it was simply absorbing, treating the belt's own material as incidental contact rather than tactical hazard. His first officer said, "They took 3 asteroid impacts on the approach." Rellen said, "I know. The third one was 30 meters across. It did not slow them." "I know. Captain, a Sorathi cruiser would not have taken that approach." "Yes," Rellen let out a long breath, "because we don't build ships that can." He said it simply, without bitterness and without admiration, the way you state the weather, as a fact about the world that exists whether you like it or not. Siren of the Keshari was in direct contact with the convoy's surviving escort captain, who was patching up his damaged ship and watching the human battleships from a distance of about 800 kilometers. She had asked him to describe what he saw. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, "Captain, they look like they were built for this specifically, not for space, for this." Siren had thought about that for the rest of the transit. They arrived at the corridor 3 hours after the rogue fleet surrendered. The battle was over. The civilian convoy was safe. The sensor feeds were still playing. And all 5 captains, approaching the same point in space at the same time, looked at the shape of the cradle on their displays, scored, damaged, missing one battery, still sitting at the position it had decided to reach. Still there. The docking bay of the temporary command post was not designed for vessels of the Cradle's class. It managed. The ship's crew had done this before. They had portable mooring gear, modified clamps, a practiced routine for situations where the dock was too small, and the mission required them to be there anyway. It took 40 minutes longer than a standard docking procedure. The ship sat half inside the bay and half out, like something that had been asked to fit in a space it technically didn't fit in and had simply decided to try anyway. The 5 captains arrived at the command post within 2 hours of each other. None of them had planned to come. All of them came. Drosk told himself he was here for the formal handover of surrendered rogue personnel. Relin was here because they were his people, and the situation required his presence. Orvin was here because she wanted data. Heave was here because he had questions. Siren was here because her people had been in those mining vessels, and she did not consider any other reason necessary. They met Captain Voss in the post's main operations room. She was not what any of them had built in their heads on the transit over. She was not large. She was not dramatic. She had a burn scar along the left side of her jaw that was old enough to have faded to a pale line, and she wore her uniform the way people wear things they have worn for a very long time. She was reviewing damage reports when they came in, and she finished the page before she looked up. She greeted each of them by name, correctly, without notes. Siren spoke first. She stood in front of Voss and said, "My people were in those vessels. All of them survived." Voss said, "Good." Siren said, "I am in your debt." Voss considered this. She said, "You would have gotten there." Siren said, "In 4 hours." "Then it wasn't your fault. You were positioned correctly for your assignment. They moved faster than anyone predicted." "That is generous." "That is accurate," Voss said. "I don't do generous, it wastes time." Orvin had been looking around the operations room while this exchange happened. The room was functional. Everything in it served a purpose that was visible. There were no decorative elements. There was a wall of damage schematics that she studied for a moment, the Cradle's hull, colored in zones of severity, large sections of yellow and a few patches of red along the bow. She said, "You took significant hull damage." Voss said, "We know. The portside forward battery is offline." "We know that too. When will it be repaired?" Voss looked at her for a moment. 72 hours if we get the materials here, 6 weeks in dock if we don't." She said it without complaint. "We'll get the materials." Drosk had been silent. He was built for silence. The Vorin, as a species, used silence the way others used language. But his silence in this room was different from his silence in the conclave chamber. In the conclave he had been comfortable. Here he was processing. He said, "Your approach through the belt, the debris contact on the forward hull." Voss said, "Yes." 3 impacts. The third was a significant mass. 31 meters. We flagged it as notable in the damage log. "It did not change your course." Voss looked at him directly. "No." Drosk said, "Why?" It was not quite a question. It was more like a statement that had left room for an answer. Voss said, "Because the convoy was in there and we needed to reach the convoy. The rock was in the way. Going around would have taken 20 minutes and cost us the escort ship. Going through cost us some hull plating." "You accepted that exchange?" "We calculated it and accepted it, yes." Drosk was quiet for a moment. He had run war game simulations of human battleships against Vorin fleet elements. The simulations had consistently shown human ships as beatable, because the simulations had modeled human captains as optimizing for ship survival. That was how every other species fought. You protected your ship because your ship was your ability to keep fighting. He said, "In our military doctrine, a captain who accepts unnecessary hull damage is considered to have failed." Voss said, "In ours too, if it was unnecessary." She let that sit. Heave stepped forward. He had been patient. Patience was a Durath quality. His species had learned it from centuries of coordinating swarm tactics across thousands of small ships. He said, "I want to ask you something honestly." Voss said, "Go ahead." "When you received the call to move to this position, what did you think?" Voss said, "I thought that's what we're here for." Heave said, "That's all." "That's all." Heave looked at her for a long moment, then looked at his fellow captains. Something moved through the room that did not have a clean name. Not shame. Not exactly respect. Something closer to recalibration, the feeling of adjusting an instrument that had been reading wrong. Relin had not spoken since entering. He spoke now. "I want to see the cradle." Voss said, "Hull tour or interior?" "Hull." She nodded, "I'll take you myself." They walked out together. The others followed. Outside, under the bay's working lights, the cradle's scarred bow faced them, plating gouged and scored, patches of exposed structural material, 3 new dents that had been punched in by rock impacts and simply accepted. It was not beautiful. It had never been beautiful. Relin stood in front of it for a long time. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The conclave reconvened 4 days later. The 5 captains returned to the chamber. The agreements were already signed. There was no new business in the formal sense. The session existed because certain things in diplomacy require a room and a table and people sitting at them before they can be said properly. Aldrich was in the observer's gallery again. Same seat, same plain gray uniform. He had a cup of water. Drosk opened the session. He went through the procedural items first: ratification updates, convoy incident report, rogue fleet status. He spoke with the same clean authority as the first session, but he moved through the items at a different pace, more carefully, like a man checking his footing on ground he had thought was solid and now wanted to test. When the procedural items were finished, there was a pause. Orvin said, "I would like to make a statement for the record." The session chair allowed it. She stood. She did not look at Aldrich. She addressed the table as a whole. "The commentary made in this chamber 4 days ago regarding human naval architecture was based on an analytical framework that I now believe was incomplete. We were evaluating human capital ships by our own tactical standards: speed, maneuverability, engagement efficiency. These are valid standards. They are not the only standards." She paused. "I have spent the last 3 days reviewing human fleet engagements in full detail. I will be submitting a revised assessment to the Thelis War College." She sat down. Heave said, "The Durath Collective will be requesting a formal military exchange program. We want observers on a human vessel, and we will offer human observers on a Durath carrier." He added, "Understanding each other's methods seems more useful than misreading them." Relin said nothing in the chamber. He had already said what he needed to say in a private message to Admiral Cressida the night before, an apology drafted 4 times and sent on the 5th, which had simply said, "My rogue ships caused a crisis that your ships resolved. I do not take that lightly." He did not know what he expected in return. He had received, "Thank you for saying that, it means something." That was all. He had found it sufficient. Siren had a practical proposal. She wanted a joint patrol arrangement for the Durath corridor transition period, Keshari fast destroyers working alongside human vessels during the handover phase. Her argument was tactical. The destroyers could cover range and speed. The human ships could cover the fixed engagements and fortified positions. Different tools for different problems. She laid it out in 3 sentences. Drosk said it was a sound proposal. He said this without hesitation. Then there was quiet again, and Drosk looked at the observer's gallery. "Commander Aldrich," he said, "you have been in this chamber for all of this. You have heard everything said 4 days ago and everything said today. I would like to give you the floor if you are willing." The session chair looked uncertain. Observers did not technically have floor rights. Drosk said, I am asking as a courtesy, not a procedure. Aldrich put down his water. He stood. He looked at the 5 captains for a moment, the same way he had looked at them on the first day, measuring something that apparently only he could see the scale of. He said, I appreciate the offer. I don't have a lot to add. Drosk said, anything. Aldrich thought for a moment. My ships were already in the area, he said. Scheduled patrol. If the ambush had happened 2 weeks earlier or 2 weeks later, we might not have been close enough to matter. That's worth remembering. We got lucky on timing. He paused. The crew of the Cradle did their job well. Captain Voss has been doing that job for 18 years and she's very good at it. She doesn't need this room to tell her that. He sat down. Orvin said quietly to the colleague beside her, he is not going to take the opening. Her colleague said, what opening? We handed him a moment to be right in public. He didn't use it. Her colleague considered this. Why not? Orvin did not have an answer right away. Then she said, I think it was already enough. The session closed. Formal procedures, signatures, the things that mark an event as complete in the official record. The 5 captains filed out. Aides collected documents. The technical staff broke down the display equipment. Aldrich waited until the room was mostly empty. He stood at the window at the side of the gallery, the same long window that looked out into open space, the same stars, the same dark. His communicator buzzed. He read the message. 4 more ISV-class vessels had completed their resupply and were back on patrol rotation. The Ardent had received emergency plating and was operational. The Cradle's portside battery was repaired ahead of schedule 58 hours, not 72. He typed good, he sent it. He stood at the window a little longer, not thinking about anything in particular, or maybe thinking about everything and choosing not to name it. Down the corridor, Drosk was walking with Relin, and Relin was saying something quietly that made Drosk pause and think before he answered. Neither of them laughed. Somewhere in the Durath corridor, 3 human battleships were on patrol rotation, moving slowly through the dark between the rocks, looking ugly and going nowhere in particular. Just being there. Just in case. That was, in the end, the whole point.